In late April, Ontario Premier Doug Ford claimed that Canada's politically appointed judiciary is overstepping its authority and that judges should be elected so that they are more responsive to the will of the people.
Just 2 months ago, our government received a strong mandate from the people of Ontario to make sure that we protect Ontario. It's a mandate to protect our workers and businesses from tariffs and economic uncertainty. But it's also a mandate to protect our communities and make our streets safe. Because right now, the federal government's broken bail system is letting far too many criminals back onto the streets just days or even hours right after being arrested. Enough is enough. At the provincial level, we are doing everything in our power to strengthen bail and keep criminals off the streets. We launched new bail teams made up of special prosecutors just over a year ago, and they're already producing real results. These teams have been involved in more than 3,000 cases, helping keep people accused of serious crimes behind bars and helping resolve these cases faster than ever before. That's why today we're making them permanent with dedicated, intensive, serious, violent crime bail teams across Ontario. You know, there's so many great judges, first of all, and there's great JPs. I'm a strong believer in our judicial system, but it's out of control now. Like you see these criminals getting out on bail, not once or twice, 4 or 5 times, and going out and committing heinous crimes. There's a story that someone was out on bail 5 times and went and killed a young lady. You know, this is absolutely ridiculous how these judges keep letting people out over and over and over again. I'm just done with it.
Our correspondent Adam Zivo has more on the debate.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford recently blasted Canada's judiciary and argued that some provincial judges are too soft on crime and too eager to engage in judicial activism that undermines his democratic mandate. He suggested that this problem could be fixed by adopting a U.S.-style system where judges are elected, not politically appointed. In response, critics have claimed that his comments undermine judicial independence and that electing judges would be a terrible idea. Their position is not unreasonable because when judges are beholden to the interests of donors and political supporters, that inevitably increases the risk of biased rulings. In the United States, for example, special interest groups sometimes spend millions of dollars installing judges who support their causes. Worse yet, some judicial elections have developed into nakedly partisan affairs. Both of these problems naturally undermine the public's faith in the law, so it's unclear why Canada should adopt such a system, especially if doing so requires a messy rewrite of the Constitution. This doesn't mean that the current system is perfect. As of now, the federal government appoints every judge who works in either the federal courts or the upper-level provincial courts. While these appointments should, ideally, be politically neutral, in practice they often are not. Over time, it's possible for a federal government to stack these courts with ideological allies, leaving no democratic recourse, which is seemingly what has happened under 10 years of liberal rule. And so, while Ford is wrong to advocate for judicial elections, he is right to a certain degree in his diagnosis of the status quo. Our judges are too ideological and they do not reliably represent the public's interests. That being said, there are some important caveats to keep in mind. Ford argues that judges grant bail too easily and are unwilling to impose harsh sentences upon violent or repeat criminals. He says that this has created a broken catch-and-release justice system that fails to keep the public safe. That's a fair criticism, but not one that should be fully absorbed by the judiciary. Yes, some politically appointed judges fail to take crime seriously, but bail and sentencing norms are strongly influenced by federal law. The Liberals, unfortunately, passed several pieces of legislation that reduced sentencing requirements and made bail incredibly accessible for dangerous criminals. So if Ford has a problem with the justice system in this respect, he should lodge his complaints with Prime Minister Mark Carney, not the courts. But the situation is different when it comes to judicial overreach and interference into Ford's democratic agenda. That's because, in recent years, there has been a troubling rise in court rulings that use specious charter arguments to intrude upon policy debates that should, ideally, be resolved in a democratic arena. For example, in early 2024, the BC Supreme Court ruled on a temporary basis that the province cannot prohibit public drug use unless every addict has access to an overdose prevention site. The presiding judge, Chief Justice Christopher Hinkson, seemed eager to use flimsy evidence to invent this charter right out of nowhere. Similarly, late last year, Ontario Superior Court Judge Michael Valent questionably determined that municipalities cannot clear out homeless encampments unless they provide shelter spaces where open drug use is permitted. The ruling seemed designed to coerce municipal governments into dramatically changing how their homeless shelters operate without democratic buy-in, even though the judge had no real mandate to impose such changes. Valente's ruling was later indirectly criticized by another Ontario Superior Court judge, James Ramsey, who, upon ruling on a similar case, noted that such issues are best determined by voters and that micromanagement by judges will not be productive. When the Ford government passed legislation to tear up Toronto's 3 main bike lanes late last year, they were thwarted by yet another Ontario Superior Court judge, Paul Chabas, who determined this April that cyclists may have a charter right to such infrastructure. Regardless of how one feels about cycling, and I say this as an avid biker, it seems far-fetched to imagine that access to bike lanes should be guaranteed as a fundamental right. Here's the problem. Canada's courts are supposed to respect the separation of powers, lest they usurp the authority of parliaments and the provincial legislatures. But when judges use fabricated charter rights to unilaterally impose open drug use and bike lanes, regardless of voter preferences, that respect seems to be missing. And so while it may be true that we should not elect our judges, because that probably wouldn't fix anything and could just make the situation worse, it is also true that there is something terribly wrong with the current system. In this way, Ford is half right about this issue.